Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping right into a seriously tangled web of post-war diplomacy that is unfolding right this very second in the Middle East. If you've been following the news, you know that the recent strikes between the US, Israel, and Iran have completely shaken up the global landscape. But what actually happens after the missiles stop flying? How do adversaries who fundamentally, deeply distrust one another sit down to stop a wider war? Well, as we're going to see today, the answer is incredibly complicated. It gets surprisingly petty at times, and it holds absolutely massive stakes for the global economy.
Okay, let's dive into this with a look at the totally bizarre reality of modern geopolitics. Check this out. On one side, we've got US President Donald Trump posting on social media that Iran requested a meeting and that it's happening tomorrow. Straightforward enough, right? Well, on the other side, an Iranian spokesperson is flat out denying it, saying the U.S. team's trip has absolutely nothing to do with their delegation's visit. So you've got U.S. and Iranian envoys sitting in the exact same city, Doha, Qatar, yet aggressively and publicly disagreeing on whether they are even meeting at all. It's a complete paradox, but it perfectly sets the stage for the deeply fractured negotiations we're about to unpack.
Here's our roadmap for today's explainer. First, the Doha diplomatic dance. Second, the unlikely mediators. Third, deep mistrust and soccer. Fourth, the Lebanon complication. And finally, the ultimate stakes. Let's untangle exactly how we got from a regional war to this incredibly strange standoff.
Section 1. The Doha diplomatic dance.
To really understand this dance, we have to look at the scene currently playing out on the ground, involving U.S. envoys Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. Because these two sides absolutely refuse to hold direct face-to-face talks, we're witnessing literal shuttle diplomacy. It really highlights the agonizingly slow pace of this whole thing. Here's how it works. Step 1. Witkoff and Kushner talk to the Qatari Prime Minister. Step 2. Qatari and Pakistani mediators physically take those messages and shuttle them out of the room. Step 3. Those mediators relay the messages to Iranian officials back in Tehran, as well as a separate Iranian technical team sitting right there in Qatar. You guys, they are literally passing notes between rooms like it's a high-stakes middle school dispute, all just to avoid acknowledging each other's presence. And all of this running back and forth is focused on one immediate goal, and that is the number 14. Specifically, they're trying to figure out the implementation of a 14-point memorandum of understanding. The whole core objective of this 14-point plan is to extend the fragile ceasefire we've seen recently and put a definitive stop to those tit-for-tat military strikes over the Strait of Hormuz. But getting both sides to actually agree on how to implement these 14 points, that is proving to be incredibly difficult.
Section 2. The unlikely mediators.
Let's move to and see how this builds, because none of this back and forth would even be possible without two specific countries willing to step right into the middle of this diplomatic minefield, Qatar and Pakistan. Now, you might be wondering why Qatar is so heavily involved right now, especially since they initially refused to mediate. Well, back in February, when the US and Israel launched strikes against Iran, Qatar and other Gulf states actually got caught in the crossfire of Iran's retaliatory strikes. Understandably, Qatar stepped back. They needed to focus on defending their own borders. But then, in April, Pakistan stepped into the fray and successfully brokered an assured ceasefire. With the temperature turned down slightly, Qatar, which relies heavily on the safety of regional waterways to export its natural gas, jumped back into the picture. So today, you have both nations jointly mediating these incredibly sensitive, fragile talks.
Section 3. Deep mistrust and soccer.
To truly understand this deadlock, we really have to look at the deeply rooted animosity between Washington and Tehran. It's so intense that it spills over into some truly surprising areas. Case in point, soccer. Following Iran's elimination from the World Cup, Mark Wayne Mullen, the U.S. head of Homeland Security, actually came out and said, "I danced a happy dance. There wasn't a single team that we had to spend more time dealing with than Iran." It's a surprisingly petty subplot, but it just goes to show that even off the battlefield, in the realm of international sports, the political friction between these two nations is absolutely palpable.
And logistically, that friction was an absolute nightmare during the World Cup. The Trump administration placed incredibly strict rules on the Iranian team. The Department of Homeland Security continuously made unproven allegations that members of the Iranian team and the coaching staff had ties to the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, or the IRGC. Because of all the travel restrictions, the Iranian national soccer team literally had to hold their training camp and stay overnight in Tijuana, Mexico, and commute across the border. There were even allegations from the team about targeted harassment at an airport in Seattle.
You have to remember, this tournament was happening while the US and Iran were effectively in a state of war, and you could feel that tension in every single interaction. But look, the mistrust goes way deeper than a soccer tournament. Iran has previously refused to sit down with US envoys entirely because they feel completely backstabbed by what happened during earlier negotiations in Oman back in February. Iran claims that only hours after the two sides held talks, the US and Israel struck Tehran. So, from the Iranian perspective, those US envoys are completely compromised. They view those previous diplomatic talks as nothing more than a smokescreen for a military strike. And honestly, that is exactly why they are absolutely refusing direct contact in Doha today. Section 4. The Lebanon Complication. The thing is, you just cannot look at the US-Iran relationship in a vacuum. We have to zoom out and look at a massive regional hurdle complicating all of this. And that's the current deadlock between Israel and the Lebanese militant group Hezbollah, which of course is backed by Iran. It's a total stalemate. On one side, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is vowing that Israel's military will continue its de facto occupation of southern Lebanon until Hezbollah completely disarms. But on the other side, Hezbollah and many in Lebanon completely reject this. They view this security deal as a total violation of Lebanese sovereignty and an outright submission to Israel. And analysts looking at this impartially point out that Israel's condition, forcing Hezbollah to disarm, is just widely considered unrealistic. Neither the Lebanese government nor its army actually has the capacity or the equipment to disarm a deeply entrenched Iran-backed group like Hezbollah. So it remains a massive sticking point in the wider regional conflict. Finally, Section 5, the ultimate stakes. So, the crucial point is, why does this strange diplomatic dance in Doha actually matter to you and the everyday global economy? Well, it essentially comes down to Article 5 of that Memorandum of Understanding we talked about earlier. This article is all about guaranteeing safe passage and freedom of navigation through the Strait of Hormuz. This narrow little waterway is an absolute geographic choke point for the entire world economy. A massive percentage of the globe's oil and natural gas flows right through this specific strait. If shipping gets cut off by tit-for-tat attacks, global energy prices will skyrocket. And that affects everything, from what you pay for gas in your car to the cost of the groceries on your local store shelves. And getting an agreement on this strait is proving to be pretty fascinating. Oman has reportedly suggested setting up a system of voluntary contributions for shipping passage just to kind of appease tensions. Iran, however, is flat out demanding compulsory fees. And there's a massive irony at the heart of these negotiations. The United States is negotiating to try and get things back to the pre-war status quo, but Iran, they feel they've proven their power to put a chokehold on the world economy, and they have absolutely no intention of going back to the way things were. They want recognition of their regional role and are essentially demanding mandatory tolls just to let ships pass safely. Now, keep in mind, all of this is operating under a ticking clock, a 60-day ceasefire deadline. However, analysts are pretty much in agreement that it's an absolute certainty this will be extended. Why? Because that 14-point memorandum of understanding they are painstakingly passing notes about right now, it isn't even the final deal. It's literally just the agenda. It's just an agreement on what they will eventually talk about when the real, serious negotiations actually begin. And when those serious negotiations finally do happen, they're going to have to address the ultimate elephant in the room, Iran's enriched uranium. Because despite the intense warfare and the strikes over the past year, Iran appears to have emerged from the conflict with its nuclear development materials largely intact. The US and Israel firmly believe this enriched uranium is intended for a nuclear weapon, a claim that Iran continuously denies. Which leaves us with this final, towering question. With the 60-day ceasefire ticking down and these two sides refusing to even look each other in the eye in Doha, can these unlikely mediators possibly solve the massive nuclear question before the shooting starts all over again? The stakes honestly couldn't be higher, and the whole world is watching closely. Thank you so much for joining this explainer, and we'll see you next time.